Does it work? It seems to work. Oh my God.
Henry, look at there you are.
All right, all right.
No way, chat is
All right,
not
we
even...
are live. So, thank you everyone for joining this panel. We I put a message out on Twitter, said, hey, you know, wouldn't it be cool if we could do a like so. Long story short, this is what, like 50%, maybe 75% of the Mainframe Hacker Society. It is a secret society of mainframe hackers. We meet occasionally and talk about our exploits. We are the driving force behind mainframe hacking. If you see tools or anything else like that come out, the people on this panel probably had a piece of it, if not one of the main developers. The way this panel is going to work is I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and if you have questions for us, I will ask those questions to the group. First, I'll let everyone introduce themselves, and then we'll start moving on to questions. So, real quick, I'm Soldier of Fortran. I do mainframe hacking. I've got a ton of videos that you can go watch on YouTube. I'll pass it on to Chad, who can introduce himself. Take your time, Chad.
Yeah, you hear me all right? This is Chad. I'm Biggie Smalls on the Twitters and otherwise. I do this for a living, so mainframe security research. And recently, fun fact about me, recently I just learned about phone books. So that's pretty cool. I'm pretty excited about that. I'll hand it over to Dan, who is on my left on my screen.
Hi, Dan Helton. I'm CH1KPEE on Twitter. I'm a consultant for NCC Group. I do pen testing, red teaming stuff, consulting during my day job, and I'm not just mainframes, but I'm kind of an enthusiast for all kinds of obscure computing platforms. Like I also like IBM iSeries or AS400, which gets confused with mainframes a lot. OpenVMS, weird old Unix. I'm into all kinds of like obscure operating systems. Who's next?
Who wants to go next?
I'll take the plunge.
Go.
This is David. No one knows on Twitter. I work as a pen tester, red teaming, and stuff like that. And I do pen testing on mainframes, and I usually steal stuff from mainframes during red team exercises. I wrote one tool, contributed to a bunch of others, and here I am. Next one is CBit31, I guess.
Yeah, that's me. So at first I started working on the mainframe. It was like this very weird platform I have never heard about. And I got really interested, like, and a lot of security was basically security by obscurity, which means no one knows about it, so it's safe, right? So that got me really interested in the security of this platform. And that's led me to here.
All right, Henry, you're last.
Well, then I have to close it up. Well, I'm Henry, Wizard of Zoz on the Twitters, and Henry Kuiper on the Twitter. Yeah, me and Phil started this secret society some time ago. At the start, it was just him and me. Now, luckily, we've nearly four to five times as big as we started out. All-round mainframe
500% more.
Yes. Now, those are some figures. We have the biggest figures ever, Chad.
Best figures, the very best figures.
Yeah, all-round mainframe junkie with a secret love for all the security-related things. Let's just leave it at that.
Okay, great. So I'm monitoring questions here. I'm thinking maybe we start this out with if you could run us down how you got into mainframe hacking, right? Like this is not a typical path for information security experts, for people who like to do cybersecurity type stuff. Getting to a mainframe is, I mean, I'll admit it's a little obscure of a platform to be going after. So, you know, my story is just, we had a guy from IBM who didn't know anything, and he was our security consultant, and that made me scared.
Just one guy?
Well, yeah, actually, he was the catalyst, but I've met more. But basically I was junior and didn't know anything about mainframes and still knew more than he did about mainframe security and hacking. So I'll run through, since Chad's speaking up, Chad, you can go first. What got you into mainframe hacking?
Yeah, so I was working for a big bank, and I don't ever mention their name publicly, but they have like a stagecoach as a mascot. So I don't work there anymore, so I can say that. And they just had kind of an epiphany one night that while I was doing some malware, looking at reverse engineering kind of stuff, at the time I was managing a group of mainframe infrastructure folks. And I was like, man, who's doing this stuff on the mainframe? I know it's important. I've seen it go down. I've seen ATMs and points of sale and all this stuff crash before, or not crash, but be unavailable if there's a mainframe outage. You know, who's doing the kind of offensive research? And so I Googled, you know, mainframe hacking, and I came up with the first name I came up with was Phil's. And so I sent him an email kind of out of the blue, like you do when you're in 4th grade, like, hey, I'm into mainframe hacking. Are you? Check yes or no and send it back. And if you've met Phil, he's super shy. So it took him forever to respond to me, but he finally got back to me. And then like 3 months later, we got married in Vegas and did a show at DEF CON and talked, and kind of the rest is history. That's it. That's the whole story. And now I do this for a living. But I want to hear Henry's story.
Yeah, Henry, you're up.
I saw a question from Chad here. It says there is no cloud, it's other people's computers, Chad.
Fabulous.
Yeah, well, how I got into mainframe hacking, I think the bigger story is how I got into mainframes. I was being a very nice student at school, pre-Y2K, and I don't know how it is in the States, but back in Europe, the years just before the Y2K were crazy on job offering things. So I did a couple of interviews and took a job at an insurance company, and they said, well, you know, we're going to have to teach you PL1 because you're going to have to program on this mainframe thing for just a little while, but we're going to migrate everything to .NET, and then you can work on the latest and greatest tech stuff. Turned out I'm still working on the mainframe, and .NET isn't as big as they promised me it would be back then. I've always had a knack for security, more breaking things and trying to figure things out. And it was only when I got Phil talking at one of the events that I organized, and we got talking, and I thought, hey, all these things that I've been doing, they apply to the mainframe as well. And it never, you know, it never connected for me that it would be basically the same thing. And because I do have the mainframe backing, it's maybe easier or harder, but yeah, from then on it took a bit of a high loop. So it's, yeah, cool stuff.
All right, who wants to go next?
I already said a little bit of my story, right? So
Yeah,
basically just looking at the mainframe, and like I was already in the system. So I just found a lot of things like where this is not how it's supposed to work. It's not just because you don't know something that you can't, that someone can break it. Like
what's an example? What would be a good example of that?
Like a data set, a file that,
Yeah.
Okay, no one can list the directory. So like, unless you know the exact name of the file, you'll never figure out that's the name of the file, right? Or it's just like APF libraries. Like now we're being more specific, but
yeah, that's
okay, yeah, no access to CSV APF is a readout, but like who's gonna know how to write an assembler program to call this macro? No one's gonna know that. So yeah, it's open, but who cares, right?
I'll talk about APF in a second. I'll explain what that is.
For the people in the chat, if you don't understand this guy, this is exactly how I feel every time I talk with him. He knows a lot. This guy.
There you go.
Is awesome. Well, everyone here is awesome. But yeah, I think I'll present myself. I actually ran before I could walk. I started hacking mainframes because I hacked one during an engagement. I used. I hear some echo.
Yeah.
I use my knowledge in Unix-based operating system to escalate privileges a little bit until I found in the ZOS side a copy of the RACF database, which is like your security database where all your accounts are. Put it offline, found that John the Ripper understands it, cracked some stuff, and escalated. And then I found Phil's videos and documentation and started learning. I think it's an awesome, incredible technology that can do a lot of super cool stuff. So it's fun. Join us.
Dan.
So mine was partially motivated by spite. My first encounter with a mainframer was before I was a pen tester, I was a security architect, and I was on a call because our deputy CISO wanted us to investigate like privileged account management systems, and he wanted us to look at everything like the Windows domain, the Linux stuff we had, etc. And we're like, okay, let's talk to the mainframers. And where I worked, I think they were mostly ZVM and not ZOS, but we got on a call. It was me and another guy who was a former IBMer who kind of spoke their language a little bit. And one of them on the phone, I still know who it was because it was like 3 guys, and I didn't learn to like recognize whose voice was which guy, but one of them got into a tear on us because he's like, if you freaking security people come in here and you put controls between me and my system, and I can't get higher level privileges when I need them, and this thing goes down and we lose millions of dollars in lost transactions, we're just down for 5 minutes, blah blah. He tore into me for like five or 10 straight minutes just ranting. I put the phone on mute and I'm cracking up, and I'm like chatting with my friend, the former IBMer, and I'm like, dude, I thought like Unix graybeards were bad, but like they ain't got shit on like mainframe sysprogs. Like these dudes are off the chain. So then it kind of became like spite, like, oh, I want to own these guys. And that year was the DerbyCon year that Dominic White, Singe on Twitter, did a presentation there at DerbyCon about hacking Kix, which we'll probably get into a little bit more. Kix is one of the formats for like mainframe programs, I guess you could say. That got me into it, and then I looked up Phil's stuff on YouTube, watched his little presentations. Eventually, I stumbled through running totally illegal mainframe emulation. I definitely did not pirate it off of a torrent site, and stumbled through kind of like learning the ins and outs of it, and got to talking to more like to Phil and Chad online. Went to I think the first Evil Mainframe course that y'all did in Charlotte, and from there I just kind of got immersed in that world. It's pretty interesting.
Nice. So we got like one of the first questions. So the question is, does one have to buy a mainframe to get started on mainframe security hacking? I think the answer is no, but we'll let the panel decide. And then what are some of the alternatives? Is there kind of an emulator solution? Who wants to tackle this question first? Like for now, going on from now, I'm not going to make everyone give an opinion. Just put up your hand.
How about if I take the legit above board option?
Yes.
And then I'll ask some of my compatriots to talk about the other things that might be out there as well.
Yes.
So if you have the luxury of either having the money or working for an organization that is willing to buy it from you, IBM makes an emulator called ZPDT. That's Zulu Papa Delta Tango, and it is a Z architecture emulator that runs on x86 in Linux, and it emulates the entire hardware platform from a CPU perspective, as well as it emulates virtual disk and that kind of stuff. And it will run the operating system, the exact same operating system that you can get on actual Z hardware. But that's how I learned. So like I said, I worked for a bank, and I was able to get them to buy me a copy of this, and I loaded it up on this laptop and taught myself all the things about systems programming and administering the system and updating it and security and breaking it and bricking it. And I can't recommend that enough. It's not cheap, but like I said, if you're in an enterprise or a company that's willing to spend a few grand on training, it's not that expensive. I think it can be had for maybe, don't quote me on this, no one's listening to this, right? I think maybe like $4,000 or $5,000 a year or something like that. So it's not cheap, but also by enterprise software perspective, it's not horribly expensive either. That's how I learned. Highly recommend it because it has all the new features. It emulates the newest hardware. You can get updates to the operating system. So if you have the ability or to spend the money on it, that is absolutely the best way to go about learning this. But there are other ways, especially since there are functions and things you have to learn about, features you have to learn about that are completely foreign to any other platform. So I'll let one of my compatriots talk about other ways you might learn some of that stuff, some of which is legal and some of which is on the bounds of maybe.
Yeah, who wants to talk about BitTorrent?
I won't talk about BitTorrent, but it popped by on the chat here as well. There is, of course, an open source emulator for the set architecture that Chad so eloquently explained, which is, in contrary to some people from three-letter companies state it's illegal stuff. The software itself, Hercules emulator, is very much legal software. IBM even provides an archaic, ancient version of the operating system that we now call ZOS. Back in the day, we called it MVS. Think of it as Windows 3.11 or maybe even DOS, you know, that old an operating system. But MVS 3.8, I think, is out there in a community version that you can boot up and load in this Hercules emulator. No, it's not the latest and greatest, but one of the things people say the mainframe is bad for, one of the things it's actually good for, a lot of stuff that runs today still runs on that old version MVS 3.8. A lot of the architecture things are still in essence the same. A lot of, I mean, the things like data sets and files and security and basic profile protection and all those things still run there, sort of. So if you want to get a hang of how the system used to be, I'd say that's your number one place to go. And then I do hear things about stuff being downloadable from BitTorrents, but I'm not the guy to ask.
Would you say it's backwards compatible, Henry? Like to a fault?
How would you rephrase that question? Yeah, you mean stuff that runs?
One of the things I hear about and about the platform on a regular basis, and one of the reasons why it ends up in some of the conundrums that it does is because of what you just said. So code that I wrote in the 60s, 70s, and 80s will run on any version of the new hardware. So IBM make this platform backwards compatible to a fault, right? Meaning that every new release has to at least run all of the stuff that happened before. You may be able to create something for a new release that doesn't work on old equipment, but the converse is almost never true. Something that you built back when it was a 24-bit system will still work on the newest version of the hardware today.
Yeah. I'd say if you would write your calc assembly on MVS 3.8, that would run the same on ZOS 2.3.4 today.
A important note for history-wise is ZOS or ZOS, if you're not American, has kind of held as the name now for a very long time. But IBM used to be in the habit of changing the name about every decade, because it was like OS 360, then it was OS 370, then it was MVS and various forms of MVS, then it was OS 390, and then they finally did ZOS around the year 2000, and that stuck so far for 20 years. We'll see if they decide to change it next year or some shit. So old-time mainframers will still use the phrase MVS, and that's just synonymous with ZOS.
That's actually a really good point. There's a lot of, you might even find system names, like if you're doing like a pen test or something, you'll see LPAR names, MVS, to this day, because when they implemented...
If you connect to FTP, it'll tell you you're connected to an MVS file system if you're not connected to the Unix version of FTP.
Yeah, Nmap still kind of calls it OS 3. It still does, I think, call it OS 390 if you do like a banner scan
OS 390
on FTP.
FTP and
yeah. I mean, that's not anywhere remotely true, but yeah, so I'm watching the chat here. There's actually you can run Hercules on a Raspberry Pi. So like if you really wanted to run a real slow mainframe, or run a mainframe like it would have run in the 60s, you can run it on a Raspberry Pi.
My first mistake when I first emulated a totally legal version of like ZOS 1.11 or something was I only gave it like a gig of memory or something in a VM, and like it took like an hour to boot, and then I figured out, oh shit, okay, yeah, let me give it like 3 or 4 gigs of RAM, and then it worked much better.
Yeah, it's a beast. But I mean, you're emulating a really powerful operating system.
Yeah.
So we don't have any other questions right now. So what I'm going to do then is maybe we will share stories of everyone's favorite hack or tool that they've written or used, or something they've done on the mainframe. Who wants to go first? Oh, actually, so I just saw in the chat someone says it doesn't run Python. I don't know if they're talking about Oracle specifically, but I do know that it runs Python in Unix. Actually, maybe now's the time for me to.
Reported it.
We can run Python.
Maybe now's the time to go through some terminology before we get too deep into this.
And Node.
20 minutes in. So LPAR, that's like a host name almost, right? Like you basically take a system and you divide it up into various LPARs. Basically the same as running multiple VMs on like an ESX. Then you have APF. So APF is the equivalent of like a kernel module, say. If you can put something in an APF authorized folder, then you can get to ring 0. I know it's called key 0, but for the people who aren't mainframers, so if you can get it into a state where you can get to key 0, then you can own the mainframe. And one of the ways to do that is to target APF folders to let you do that. What other terminology am I forgetting here, folks? There's a ton. Oh, Unix. So the main like the main interface is like TSO. That's that green screen interface you usually see in movies or TV shows or in any of our talks. It also runs Unix. So one of the things that people have mentioned, especially Jira, was, you know, the gateway to mainframe hacking is through Unix, because you can do all kinds of stuff. In fact, Chad's first talk at DEF CON, Get the Bingo Ready, was talking about doing a buffer overflow against a vulnerable C program on the mainframe in Unix, right? So it does run Unix. A lot of programs, a lot of cool stuff you can do in Unix. In fact, on Unix, so in the TSO world, you have APF authorized folders, and if you put anything in a folder, it's APF authorized. In the Unix side of the fence, there's an actual bit that sets it APF authorized. So much like you have like a set UID bit, you have a set APF bit that you can set on the file system, and now that program can run in key 0. So I think that's pretty much, as we're getting into like hacking tools and stuff, I wanted to get some terminology. What else? What other terminology am I forgetting here, folks?
Well, one thing to over confuse our 5 attendees to this call, I don't think we should keep saying runs Unix, because it doesn't actually run Unix.
Yeah, it's part
right?
of the OS.
It's just another interface into the operating system that looks and feels like Unix, but it's not running a Unix kernel, so to say. It's just an interface.
Yeah,
keep that in mind.
And like that's the reason. So Unix was included as part of the operating system in the 90s, and it came with, and it brought the network stack to the mainframe. I mean, it was implemented before, but it brought an upgraded network stack. And that's why a lot of systems today, if you find them, have MVS in their host name, was because that's when they were adding these systems to networks. And at the time, the operating system was called MVS. And so what do you do on MVS? Oh, that's a good question. What about security? What about security for mainframes? So there's 3 products that run on the mainframe, RACF, ACF2, and Top Secret. They all do the same thing. Basically, the operating system runs and it asks the security product questions all the time. It's basically a database of permissions and rights. Think of it like Active Directory on a domain, right? So you're on the mainframe, you're trying to do something, it will go ask the security product, is that person allowed to do that? And the security product has a list of permissions in a database saying yes, no, so on and so forth. So RACF is IBM's product. It's like the majority of the market today. And then you have Broadcom's ACF2 and Top Secret, which make up, and there's the commands are different, but the security controls are the same. Within reason. I don't want, I mean, we can get into like a detailed discussion about how ACF2 handles USS or Unix or OMVS, which is the same thing. All 3 of those things is one thing, the same, but I don't think people want to hear that for an hour. So any other terminology? So is RACF system-wide or specific to each LPAR? Anyone? I'll let someone else answer the question.
It depends.
It depends.
Oh God, the most mainframer answer.
Right? I mean,
the RACF system is specific to your environment, right? And such a mainframe environment can consist of a single LPAR, think single node, single image, but it can also span multiple LPARs, which can then even span multiple physical machines and geographic locations. But it's for a system, and that system can be compromised of either one LPAR or more LPARs. But as long as you have this sysplex thing, you know, where we have multiple instances operating together to form a single logical system view to the end user and the applications, then yes, the RACF runs for that whole ensemble of things.
Okay. Good follow-up question. What is the biggest flaw with mainframes, and what do you go for? Jiro, I'll let you go first. Oh, I'm still typing away. Anyone else want to tackle that question?
I mean, honestly, the biggest thing I see on a regular basis is the it's sad, but it's really a lot of the basics. I mean, we got people who know mainframe security really well, but don't have a real good concept of, let's see how many buzzwords I can throw in here, like today's current threat landscape. And so, you know, there are things we see where it's like, look, we've set passwords for these things, so it must be fine. Or we're using self-signed certificates, so at least we're using SSL, right? Everything's good, okay? So, I mean, there's a lot of basic, or these people don't have access to the mainframe, so we don't have to worry about locking down X, Y, and Z. A lot of the stuff we see are really basic problems. We do see some more complicated stuff, but I would say a lot of the stuff we see are still really, really simple things that you would have had cleaned up on a Windows machine or a Linux machine, you know, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Henry, I don't know, do you have a different comment?
Yeah, I would say culture and complacency are the biggest pitfalls. Right, the mainframes are so archaic. The things I hear a lot is, yeah, but who knows how to do that anyway? So it's a lot of, the biggest challenges are not technical challenges. It's mostly getting the peeps who run these systems aware of the results of when they don't do what you tell them to do, that they should lock down, bolt down, change, configure. Yeah, one of the things you said, Chad, self-signed certificates, they will go shouting through the office hallways, celebrating that they have SSL enabled. And I go, oh, that's cool, but it's a self-signed thing, so how secure is that? Right, it's more of the common things, and like you say, stuff that has been fixed on other platforms 15 years ago. Not that it cannot be fixed on the mainframe, it's just not being done. Right, remember this this humongous bug in the TSO environment where you log on to the mainframe, you give it a random user ID, you don't give it a password, you press enter, and the system says, hey, that's not a valid user. Right, on Linux and Windows, that's a no-brainer. That should be fixed. IBM has fixed this pretty fast after the exploits on this subject were made public. I still yet have to see every company roll out that change in production, because they just don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. We hear you now.
Okay, cool. I'm on the same boat of the other guys. Basically, to add something new, also, there are so many different subsystems and application servers and components that there's no expert in everything. So your typical mainframer thinks that the Unix is just a toy, and they maybe don't care about it, or even if they care, they're not Unix experts. So they don't know how to secure that. Or you have the Unix team that has no idea about the storage guys and stuff like that. So when you combine all those little pieces, as it happens in the distributed world, you're going to get pitfalls and issues here and there. And most of the time, you will find that the common stuff, so reusing credentials or having credentials stored in configuration files and whatnot, can give you a lot of access, because you jump from one system to the other. You jump from, I don't know, a TSO, the green screen part, to the Kix, which is an application server. From Kix, you can jump to the Unix part and maybe gain access to a database where there's actually the money. I mean, we like to pawn things and get root, or in the case of the mainframe, special or operations, but you have to think that the real money is in actual applications, and the stuff they need to protect is in actual applications. So when I remember the first time I had to write, how do you test a mainframe? I told the customer, well, take any network pen test description you have. That's exactly the same thing. We do information gathering, we enumerate users, we map the attack surface, we start guessing, we start breaking stuff, we start looking at the things you have everywhere. It's exactly the same thing with a way, way bigger scale in a relatively small box. and with a lot of computational power and features.
Okay, so what would with all this nice high level stuff, when you're going after the mainframe, when you're doing like a mainframe pen test, what specifically are you targeting? I'll leave it up. Who wants to go first with that? Like what are you targeting specifically?
I can take that.
Yeah, go.
So, which is exactly the first step I usually do during a red team exercise. You look where they are located in the world. You look at the weather or your calendar, and you start password spraying around. I live in Sweden. I can promise you here the winter is long and ugly. People love summer. So I can guarantee you that in any company here, you will find someone that has a password made by summer and 2020, for example. The exact same thing happens in the mainframe. You take summer 20, and I guarantee you will find one of the accounts with that. Or I don't know, where are we? May 2020, maybe it's short. So let's say May 2020 exclamation mark, something like that. That's my go-to thing, because people is still people. They tend to take those shortcuts to remember their passwords.
And that's one of the things, right? Mostly mainframe passwords are limited to 8 characters. So that's a really short password this day and age.
But
now I have a
let's not breeze by that. That's actually kind of a pretty important point. I hear this online all the time, like, well, we're using this banking system, blah blah blah, and they force you to only use 8 characters. Must be a mainframe behind that, and there may have been some truth to that in the past, that the mainframe limitation was the limitation for the online banking users, but that's probably not the case anymore. It's probably not the case that every online banking user has a mainframe account, right? That those users are being authenticated somewhere else, not on the mainframe. However, it is true that for passwords, not passphrases, but for passwords, the maximum length is 8 on most mainframes. You can use passphrases, but almost nobody ever does. So that is a huge just the point made earlier. That's a huge vulnerability, right? It's just the entropy, the lack thereof of passwords.
So Chad, since you're talking about passwords, what specific, when you do a mainframe pen test, what specifically do you go in looking for? So we talk about the network, like doing password sprays. What do you look for specifically?
I'll tell you some of the fun stuff I look for that maybe wouldn't, that I don't know how well it translates to other systems, but the folks that administer mainframes are, generally speaking, they never throw anything away, right? So the first piece of JCL that they wrote in 1962 still exists out there in one of their folders. And honestly, a lot of things I do when I go looking on mainframes, once I've gotten through my normal, kind of list of stuff to look for, is I'll just start doing some big grep-like searches on, Henry's home folder, looking for things like password or keys or certificates or all this kind of stuff, because, or even like, copies they may have made of security databases and that kind of stuff, because they generally keep everything. So there's a tremendous amount of information in those folders. I have found name and address files. I've found account balance files from that one time they did a conversion from MasterCard to Visa, and they needed to save a copy of this, so they just saved it in their own directory, right? I mean, this is just rampant, the amount of personally identifiable information and security information kind of stuff that I find in people's own directories.
I have the exact same experience once. We had code execution via an application that we found on a Windows box. And I wasn't able to I was able to run stuff with the application account that didn't have any TSO access, no green screen access. And the odd thing is, so I said, okay, but I have some ideas. I know where the mainframe is to start with. I can start enumerating users and do the spraying. I wasn't able to connect at all. They had a very odd configuration of LUs for the non-mainframers. Logical units are think like a TCP port on the application layer. something that connects you to application via the network. And I wasn't able to figure out that for saving my life. And I found actually a copy of the configuration in a sysprog home directory. And I found which LUs I had to run there to gain access and then run the other stuff. And there were, I don't know, you find scripts that maybe had credentials in the past. They don't have it anymore, but there's always a backup copy somewhere. So exactly the same thing. It can give you, yeah, they are very, very worried about uptime and not losing stuff. So they save everything.
Yeah, that's the type of security by obscurity that I noticed. Like, just because like no one's gonna guess the LU name, like no one's gonna guess that this is the open port, right? Like, yeah. No, that's not how you secure things.
Yeah, it's just, it takes more time, but it's not that it's impossible to guess. Yeah, admin password.
Yeah, I think for me the faith that mainframers at the time, like this is like 5-6 years ago, the faith that a lot of mainframers put in obscurity, keeping them safe, was misplaced. And that's sort of what drove me to doing this.
I mean, do you feel like that? Do you feel like that was a conscious? Let's have a philosophical debate about this for a second. Do you think that was a conscious decision that someone said like nobody fucking understands? Can we say fuck on this? I think we can, right?
Too late now.
You did.
You can say gosh, darn,
like
heck,
4
all
times.
that.
Oh yeah, you can swear you liked it.
Okay, do you think that they made a decision to like, hey, nobody understands this fucking thing. Nobody can get their hand on them because they cost like hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars. Fuck it, we're not gonna. Why bother even locking it down? Or do you think it was more like, we have all these other things to worry about, and it's super systems complex, and we have all this other stuff, and we don't even really know, like we don't even know about what locking it down. What even would that mean?
I think from a leadership perspective, you're probably right about. We've got other shit to worry about. We've got all these Windows machines that are getting hacked 24/7. Let's worry about that. We don't need to worry about the mainframe, right? Yeah. And then, but in my experience, oftentimes you would even talk to mainframers about like, well, no, you should probably implement this security control. And they would say, why? The risk is nothing because no one can hack this.
Yeah. I would liken it to selection pressure. It's like the fucking dodo on like Mauritius. It had like no predators, so it's just a big fat dumb bird that just waddles around. That's what
I don't know anything about what you just said there. What was it? Could you translate that for me?
Okay, so the dodo bird, which like the famous example of an extinct animal, it was named like island of Mauritius in the South Pacific.
Good.
It had no predators. It had no selection pressure from a science standpoint. There was nothing coming after it. So as soon as like sailors showed up with like dogs and pigs, they just wiped the bird out because it was just a dumb thing that lived on the ground that had nothing to worry about. If Windows cost, $100,000 a year to run, then no one would have like exploits for Windows except like the NSA. But since like Windows, anybody can run a copy at home of basically the same thing that runs in a data center, and same thing with like Unix, via Linux and FreeBSD and all that. There's a lot more pressure. People are a lot more able to learn it and find exploits.
So is this you arguing, Dan, that security by obscurity does work?
Well, as soon as somebody takes their freaking eyeballs and looks at it, because Anaconda basically, so that's a story Phil's told many a time in different presentations. One of the guys that founded the Pirate Bay just got pissed off at his native Sweden over, all the legal threats they made against him, and just said, I'm going to hack like some Swedish companies, like, Phil can go into more of that, what companies there were. He just like looked at a mainframe over like a week or two and like figured out, okay, here's like 3 O days I can use to own them. So it's like as soon as anybody's eyeballs went to it, with that kind of attitude, with the attitude of a predator, of an attacker, he immediately found things wrong with it, and he was able to hack like 2 or 3 mainframes have been proven. I think there's another one that they think he did, but I don't think they've legally proved it was him.
This is the most amazing, like, cast your eyes upon the system and ye O days shall appear kind of story I've ever heard in my whole life. It's
literally what happened. That is literally what happened.
Lay your hands on the system and ye O days.
Yeah, Anaconda basically over like a weekend just like downloaded Hercules and found a bootleg ZOS image on.
It wasn't a weekend. It was over like a year or 2. He was in that system for 2 to 3 years.
I heard he did it between lunch and happy hour. I heard he had like,
God. talk about like raising someone up on a pedestal.
That day he had like some hard-boiled egg for lunch, and he was meeting some of his peeps down at like B-Dub 3 for
is hard-boiled eggs the euphemism for cocaine?
Yes. And
okay,
then,
just making sure.
And then he had some wings with his buddies, and in between there he found like 8 Odays.
I'm hoping one day Darknet Diaries does a whole episode, like a 5-part episode on Anakata and Logica. There's
and like
so
what he
much
eats
stuff
for
there.
lunch, right?
Yeah, and nothing about the mainframe, just his daily habit in Cambodia.
On site in Cambodia as he was hiding from everyone.
Did he have like a Hunter S. Thompson-esque like schedule, like bump of cocaine, like at 9 o'clock, 9:15,
put diaper on,
like
the mainframe diet. In other words, the mainframe diet for sure.
Yeah, but I think the point is, I also heard the same argument at Visa of like, well, you can't just go out and buy a mainframe and therefore it's more secure than Windows. That's why we don't have to be as persistent as we can get complacent with controls because we don't have to worry about hackers attacking. That's why we got started. That's why we started the Hacker Society, to help drive more people to actually give a shit about this platform in management and executive positions. Right?
I mean, I think there's some truth to that, right? Like probably not a lot of people out there that know how to hack, say, ICBM launch facilities because, you know, they're pretty obscure, right?
Or ICS.
Not right. Well, that's different though. That's a little easier to get to.
Now I think it wasn't 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's spot on. So I do think they benefit from some security by obscurity, but in the ranking of things, if you have like ICBMs down here and you know Ubuntu up here, then I think you know it's probably middle or middle top now, given it's still a fairly ubiquitous system used in a lot of places, and there are thousands and thousands of people who interact with it every day. And you could still get one. That's the other thing. You know, like maybe we can't afford to buy a brand new one, but certainly if we were a nation state, we could buy one on the used market. We could buy a brand new one. We could take it apart bit by bit, right? There's nothing stopping any of that from happening.
Yeah, there are 18
I have a different opinion.
I just saw a very nice ZBC12 on eBay for $5,000. I mean, I know some nation states who can afford that one, Phil.
Yeah.
Or like that 15
in my opinion,
bought one from Rutgers University and just put it in his basement and learned it.
Yeah.
I think that the state right now is more like, I don't know, the phone system in the late 80s and 90s. So it's big, it's expensive. They think that the technician knows about that. On the other hand, there are manuals available. I learned a lot from the IBM manuals that are freely available online everywhere. You just have to read them. A couple of gazillion pages, no worries. And you will figure out how to do that.
It's not a lack of documentation, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's quite nearly a problem. It's too much documentation. But if you think like we think, then it's fairly easy to figure out how you can misuse features that are there. So I think it's just, first of all, there's, so if we take the common IT person, the mainframe marketing, they heard about is it's legacy, it's old, it's COBOL, that no one's ever updated since the 60s. The people working with the mainframe heard instead, it's super secure, it's impossible to hack because the architecture is unhackable because it's not like it's a normal machine with memory and storage and stuff like that. So they think it's impossible because by design you cannot hack it. While on the other hand, there are books that you can read online for free that tells you exactly what to do. The point is that you need a little bit of time, but I think that everyone can, if you're obsessive enough, you can take, you start with Master the Mainframe, which is a freely available system online. And there's a contest that you can subscribe for, but you can also have an account just for education. You start from there, and then you read a few books, and I promise you, in could be weeks, could be a couple of months, but you will find out at least one thing where you want to grind your teeth on and maybe write a tool or start playing with it. I think it's there's too much documentation. That's the issue. So you need someone to kind of guide you, but it's possible. It's just a fails myth, I want to say, that it's impossible to hack. They believed it's impossible to hack. I think you read impossible to hack a mainframe on Quora, Stack Overflow, mailing list, whatnot, quite often, compared to the number of times where the mainframe word comes up.
I heard you mention, David, I heard you mention COBOL. Isn't that the source of basically most of the world's problems today? Like, if I read, weren't there a bunch of really good articles out there recently?
Yeah.
About
Most
how
of the state of New
COBOL
Jersey's problems, apparently.
Isn't it
Yeah.
all based on COBOL?
But
Just
I
COBOL.
mean, I'm a hacker. I don't freaking care about the problems of the world, but I know one thing that is super cool. You mentioned backward compatibility before. And if you take your binaries compiled in COBOL, you can run it on the latest machine or whatever. One cool thing is that since they update the machine and the compiler very often, I think that COBOL has a major release every 2 years and like a rolling release every like 2 months, 4 months, something like that. But anyhow, if you take your source code and you recompile it, you will gain access to the latest features of the compiler and the actual hardware. And your code, the same code you wrote, runs from 20 to 70% faster. So how awesome is that? You just recompile your code and magically it runs faster. I think, come on, there's a lot of stuff in the mainframe world which is exactly like that. Oh, we have the memory and, sorry?
I said I can barely compile C shit that was written like 10 years ago.
Can you imagine taking like your entire enterprise application written in C and Java, picking it up and just dropping it on hardware that's like 10 years newer than the hardware it was just running on, and an operating system that's like 10 releases later, and it just fires up and works? Like that shit would never happen.
Not on Linux. Not with NPM.
Not on Windows.
No, definitely not on Windows. All right, so it looks like we got maybe like 12 minutes left. There's two more topics we got to cover, maybe 3. COBOL, debuggers, and like closing thoughts. So who wants to tackle debuggers real quick?
I heard Henry does. No?
No. Test. TSO test is the only debugger you'll ever need.
That's like the X. That's like the edge of debuggers, right?
It's fucking the worst.
Yeah. So the only one out there that is really, really good is a for-profit operation called ZXDC, and it's the best one out there for ZOS bar none. IBM makes 3 or 4 different ones that are 3 or 4 different versions of shit. And I've done some blog posts on them before. They're all crap. They're really bad. I say that when the audience that's listening to this is thinking about a debugger, they're thinking about something where they can go in and sort of reverse engineer something or check out some binary that's out there. All of these debuggers were designed for people who have the source code to the thing that they're debugging, right? Which for a lot of information security folks is not the case. So
aren't you working on Radar or whatever that product is
yeah,
called?
so we are, that has been a long road
years.
because we're dependent upon another
Capstone.
Thank you. Another repo called Capstone to basically make all that work. And there is also, I know for a fact the IDA Pro folks are writing a module for Z to work there. But again, that won't be live. That'll only be a disassembler. But it'll be fantastic because it'll be IDA.
And we had someone, Binary Ninja, someone added Unix support. Someone from the Hacker Society. I don't know if they want that out there name, but they added support for Unix binaries to Binary Ninja. So I mean, they do exist, but they're not great. All right, I'm gonna say we have got 5 minutes. Oh wait, you didn't name a product there, Chad. Like the specific debugger. Oh, which one did you name?
ZXDC was the one that I named. That's like an actual product that's phenomenal.
Okay. And then if you want a real good primer on reverse engineering stuff, I would recommend you go watch Chad's talk from Black Hat last year, 2 years ago.
What even is a year? I don't know. It was like
pre-pandemic times.
March minus days. I don't know.
Yeah. It's a fantastic talk on sort of like vulnerability hunting, like to find a 0 day. For about 5 minutes, I'm just going to open up the floor here. Thoughts on COBOL and how it's ruining our economy. Go.
COBOL is taking you hostage because it can run math faster.
Yeah. COBOL actually created the coronavirus. I don't know if you know that or not. But
Yeah, Bill Gates wrote COBOL.
yeah, he
It.
was working on COBOL in a lab, and he ended up creating the coronavirus instead of a program that just basically sums up your bank account and gives you a total.
Yep.
That's
And COBOL runs 5G, so.
Yeah, it does. That is all COBOL is 5G now.
We're making fun because there's a bunch of like hack journalists, I want to say like 2 weeks ago, who after New Jersey came out and said that they need help with their COBOL, because which was may or may not have been a lie. They needed COBOL developers to help them get their UI system working again. And so a bunch of people volunteered, and they haven't taken up any of those volunteers up on their offer yet. But then every single technologist who's based in the Bay Area came out and was like dunking on COBOL as hard as possible. So
here's
they could get in the zeitgeist.
My 30-second on COBOL is this,
Yeah.
right? These UI systems have been working for years and years and years and years and years and years, and nobody really noticed or cared, and they're fine. And all of a sudden we have like a 50x increase in volume, and they tip over, right? So in my mind, that's probably not a coding issue, right? That is probably a capacity, performance, and scalability issue. And the other thing I'll say about this is, there's no such thing as a legacy technology that is released that has new releases regularly, right? You can't call a Tesla a legacy means of transportation just because there used to be a car called the Model T, right? Like it doesn't. And electric motors were created in the late 1800s. It's like, who wants to drive one of these fucking old Teslas that's like has its roots in Model Ts and electric motors from the 1800s? Nobody says that kind of stuff. It's the same kind of ignorance when people talk about mainframes and COBOL, saying, "Oh, this shit's got its root in the 50s." It's like I like to turn that on its head and just say, look, these systems have been running large, and some of them have been neglected and not updated, and they've still been running for years and years and years and years, right? So it's not an issue. It's not a technology issue. It's a management has not invested in people, or has not invested in updating their mainframe or systems or whatever, and now they're paying the price for it. And I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of the questions and arguments I get are, why aren't they just moving to the cloud? Oh, the mainframe can't handle this. Why aren't they moving to the cloud? And I say, if it was cost effective to move off the mainframe, if the mainframe wasn't making companies money and was actually costing them more to run and keep up to date and keep their logistics running, don't you think a company like Walmart would have moved off of it already?
Right. Well, the giant philanthropic financial services company giving millions of dollars a year to IBM because the technology is shit. Like,
the goodness of their fucking heart.
Right. That makes sense to you in your mind, right? Like, you get that, right? They're all paid on the how well they spend their money. If that makes sense to you, then go ahead and keep dunking on this stuff, because otherwise you're a hack who doesn't really understand how anything works.
I'll say this. If someone makes an update to a COBOL library like IBM, that doesn't instantly cause thousands of websites to die and your Netflix to go under. Unlike Node, unlike there's going to be Python 2 libraries that corporations are going to rely on for decades, right? Because they don't want to spend the money to upgrade. Why would they? It works right now. But imagine you moving to Ubuntu 20 and finding out none of your apps work because you relied on 2.7, right? That doesn't happen in the mainframe world. You upgrade, you buy the newest hardware, you buy the newest software, and your tax app you wrote in the 60s runs today, and you just don't need to worry about it. That's often why companies don't talk about their mainframes and don't hear about it a lot, because it doesn't make noise. It just works.
Let's also say that just COBOL isn't rocket science, right? I mean,
no, it's
but COBOL was written so that business people could helpfully help write code because they could understand what it looks like. I mean, if COBOL has any major drawbacks, is that it's just super fucking verbose, right? Like, most of the sentences we've said on here are valid COBOL constructs.
Yep. So we got about 5 minutes left. I'll have everyone give maybe some parting thoughts on mainframe hacking, mainframe security. Who would like to go first?
I'll go. I always like talking. If I can say anything to you, it's harder when you're a consultant like me, but if you work in-house at a place that has IBM Big Iron, call the mainframers bullshit, because they'll tell you that simultaneously the mainframe is also Fort Knox, but it's also a hemophiliac baby surrounded by Fabergé eggs. So call their bullshit, like, you know, oh, if it's really this sensitive, then we need to test it. Don't we need to make sure that it's, you know, secure? And then also like, well, if it's as secure as you say it is, then there's no harm in letting little old me, you know, freaking take a smack at it. Also, happy Derby Day for everybody. Even though there's no Kentucky Derby today, I'm still drinking juleps.
Nice. Who would like to go next? Parting thoughts.
Yeah, my closing. I'll give you the short closing I do on the talks that I do. Start taking it seriously, right? Don't shove it away under the carpet saying, no, we're the mainframe, we are secure. And if you're the pen tester guy who accidentally or on a job based sees the mainframe, don't be told no, right? If I think like Dan was saying, if they're saying it's such a good Fort Knox fortress, why can't I have a stab at production for testing, right? But why can't I run my tool against your production environment? It might fall over. What if somebody else does it? Don't you want to see that tested? And that, yeah, keep pushing the boundary on it would be my advice.
Yeah,
And-
that's it. That's why I'm in this so much into this. Like, I really would like to see the mainframe like be properly secured, not just some bull BS. Oh, it's secure because no one can touch it, right? So that's the part I really love. Yeah.
A different thought, maybe. If you talk and explain to mainframers that you actually like the platform and you care about it, they will become very, very helpful. There are still people that are super unfriendly, but most of them, they will light up and help you. And they have a lot of knowledge, so you can learn from them, you can teach them, it's going to be fun.
Amen. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let them know that you're not there just to dunk on them, that you want to help them. You respect the platform, you know it's not legacy like every moron thinks, and that you want to make the platform better. You don't want to just, you know, dunk on them.
Yeah, look, this whole, I mean, we spent a lot of this panel dunking on mainframers, but we're all here because we love the platform and we want to see it treated with the same amount of respect that the other platforms get from a cybersecurity perspective, right? We don't want to see, we don't want to see articles like this 60-year-old platform got hacked and now all your data's out there, right? Like, we don't want to see those articles. We want to see it treated and treated with the same respect you would treat just the other systems. And with that, I want to thank everyone for having us here. Thanks for everyone for attending this talk in the chat. Some real good questions, some real good discussions going on in the chat. So I really appreciate everyone who attended. If you have any questions or any follow-up, we'll see how to get if everyone wants to give out their Twitter handle, we're really approachable. If you have questions on, like, Twitter's probably the best way to reach most.
Sometimes you can even get all of us to respond.
Yeah, in one tweet thread. So if you have questions, reach out to us on Twitter. We're trying to be very approachable. If you're interested in doing mainframe hacking, you're interested in getting into mainframe hacking, reach out to us. We will point you to resources that will get you started. And with that, I think I'll leave it over to turn it over to the host. Thanks again for having us. And if you have any, I was gonna let everyone do their Twitter handle. So I'm at mainframed with a D 767. Chad, why don't you go next?
Big Andy and Smalls.
Who's next?
Nogonosa.
One KPEE.
So Nogonosa and Chickpea with a 1. And then Henry, you want to give yours?
Yeah, Wizard of Zoz.
That's right.
Is
All
it
right,
B31? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Thanks, Leo. All right, everyone. Thanks for attending the panel, and thanks for having us, guys.
Yo, that
Thank
was
you.
amazing. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. Big Iron. Alrighty. Well, next up, we have Reed. And Reed's going to be speaking about layer 2 devices, owning switches, and what you can do with them. In his abstracts, he's got that the answers probably won't be too surprising, but getting there will be. So we're just going to quickly stop the stream, and we're going to restart it again. And we'll